Canada and the United States have a long-running rivalry, but it's mostly come down to hockey and jokes about Mounties and maple syrup. The jokes are starting to wear thin, however, as Canada experiences a real economic downturn and begins falling far behind the American economy. In this video, we're going to take a look at why Canada is lagging so far behind the United States economically and what can be done about it. What's going on, and why is this happening? Are there areas where Canada's economy is still strong in comparison to the States? The answers get to the heart of Canada's current political and social crisis, as well as huge blind spots in its economy that need to be faced as soon as possible. Let's get started. Canada's living standards are falling and everything keeps getting more and more expensive. From food to education, prices are only rising. The same is true in the United States, however, there's a big difference. The US economy is also surging ahead, while Canada's remains stagnant and stuck. As a result, American firms and individuals are spending more than ever, while Canadian spending and economic health is on the ropes. As the United States begins to turn things around and improve after the pandemic, Canada is doing the exact opposite. The numbers show a very dire economic future for Canada. New statistics from the OECD predict that Canada will be the worst of 38 developed economies by 2060 and have the lowest increase in GDP per capita among all its peers. The reason why the US is doing so much better than Canada right now and for the foreseeable future is based on four main reasons: surging productivity, high competition, lower taxes, less red tape. Let's start with economic productivity. Canada just isn't producing nearly as much per capita as other economies and has fallen well below the United States. In the year 2000, the Great White North was 82% as productive as the US in terms of real output per capita, but as of 3 years ago, that had fallen to 77% and is now down to around 70%. While Canada is still ahead of New Zealand and Japan in production per capita, it's quickly falling and expected to get worse and drop below the OECD average in the near future. Meanwhile, countries like Germany, Australia, and the UK surge ahead in productivity. Because productivity per capita is declining, Canadian wages have also grown much more slowly relative to inflation. This becomes a vicious cycle that can be hard to escape, as underpaid workers drop out of the workforce or begin to be less productive. The data shows that Canada's top companies aren't innovating or introducing new goods and services nearly as often as peer nations. Canadian companies are less well-funded with capital, introduce less new products and services onto the market, and are led by a series of Canadian governments which have done almost nothing to actually grow productivity. The drop in Canadian productivity is also made much worse by weak business investment in machinery and technology that would help workers do their jobs more efficiently. The data also shows that Canadian business practices have become less robust and less competitive compared to the US, which significantly hurts economic production numbers. This leads to the next key area where Canada is falling behind the United States: less competition. Whatever criticisms can be made of the American economy and its many faults, it's still an enormously competitive economic powerhouse. American businesses are pumping money into new construction projects, equipment, employees, training upgrades, and improvements across the board. They are competing with each other and driving up innovation and capital expenditures as companies try to outdo each other and attract more of the heavy spenders in the growing economy. As Canadian GDP has shrunk and stagnated in the past 3 quarters, US GDP accelerated to a stunning 4.9% growth in the third quarter this year. The US and Canada have both been hit hard by inflation, rising interest rates, and economic pressures. But whereas Canadian companies and homeowners are drowning under disastrous debt levels, American companies and individuals are ready to spend, compete, and hone their economic vitality. That's why rising interest rates have hit Canadians so much harder and made more spending and competition unrealistic for so many firms. Meanwhile, consumers spend less too, feeding into a death spiral. The numbers don't lie, with Canadian household debt surging to 102% of GDP in the first quarter of 2023, compared to the US rate of 74% of GDP in the same time window. The situation is likely to get even worse, with an expected 32% rise in average monthly mortgage payments for Canadians coming in 2024. Add this on to the extremely high cost of life in Canada, and we have a crisis on our hands. This brings us to the next area where the US is currently dominating: lower taxes. Taxes aren't everything, but they're definitely something, and even before the pandemic, Americans were spending around 10 cents per dollar on taxes compared to Canadians spending 15 cents per dollar on taxes. That's a lot of money eaten out of thin air by a greedy government. Canadians are in a position where they are saving as much after-tax income as they can. They need to prepare for higher mortgage payments that could go up by 48% in 2026. Canadian taxpayers already shoulder a massive burden, and when you add in the household debt crisis, you end up with a recipe for recession. While both Washington and Ottawa are going heavy on spending, America is also far outspending Canada proportionally. The US deficit will rack up around 6% of GDP this year, while Canada will hit just over 1%. America's infrastructure spending, Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and semiconductor stimulus policies have all helped boost the economy in big ways. When you add in lower taxes than Canada at the state and federal level, it becomes clear why Canada is struggling so much in almost every economic area. As Scotiabank economist Rebecca Young notes, a lot of the tax measures for businesses that Canada has announced haven't even been defined yet, leaving businesses in the dark about what to expect and worsening the current outlook. Then you come to the next big advantage of the US: less red tape and regulatory bureaucracy than Canada. Canada's federal, provincial, and municipal laws are stuffed full of red tape and extensive bureaucratic processes that impede entrepreneurship and make Canada's economy even worse. The US red tape situation is becoming more burdensome, but it's still not as bad as Canada, where endless bureaucracy gets in the way of a lot of attempts by companies and individuals to grow and innovate. The US is the most high-tech, powerful economy on Earth, and it's surging ahead in military development, medical innovation, information technology, and production. Although China's economy is technically bigger than the US, it still lags far behind in diversification and robustness. Still, while Canada is currently struggling deeply, the US also has to watch out for wage stagnation, aging infrastructure, over-outsourcing by multinational companies, runaway healthcare costs, and budget deficits. Canada's strengths in its mining sector and service sector hold promise, and its energy reserves are still significant. As the world's seventh largest oil producer with a vastly diversified modern economy, Canada's not going to plunge into poverty anytime soon. As the largest foreign supplier of energy to the US, Canada also has its biggest trading partner right next door, which is another great benefit. But these positive aspects of Canada's situation don't erase the current reality, which is that Canada's bureaucratic, high-taxing governments are taking a wealthy country full of potential and turning it into a bloated welfare state that's underperforming in almost every area. Canada should be doing amazingly, but decades of poor decisions in its housing sector, healthcare, political realm, and fiscal policy have left Hockeyland struggling. Canada needs to get serious very quickly about boosting economic productivity and increasing competitiveness if it wants to avoid a major recession. Ottawa should also be putting a federal minister in charge of boosting productivity and examining these economic problems in detail, instead of just focusing on bringing in 500,000 immigrants every year who falsely bloat economic statistics and growth and hide how bad the situation actually is, which is even worse than the official numbers. The United States is currently having a big comeback, but Canada is going the opposite direction. Canada's top earners know that they can earn a lot more in the US, and from nurses to engineers, heading stateside can be the smartest decision they make. Ottawa needs to get serious very fast if they don't want Canada to get iced out and left behind by the global economy and by their neighbor. If you like this video and want to learn more about Canada, check out this video here. And if this video brought value to you today, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video. Thanks for watching.